All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. And I am bringing Robbie onto the screen as well. This is Left Bank Books and the Missouri Botanical Garden welcome herbarium curator, associate professor, and a leader in the field of medical botany, Cassandra Quave, who will discuss her new inviting memoir, The Plant Hunter. Quave will be in conversation with best-selling author of The Drunken Botanist, Amy Stewart. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Cassandra, Amy, and the Missouri Botanical Garden, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. We offer in-store shopping, curbside pickup, and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. We are happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. We hope that you enjoyed this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a copy for you or for your friends at left-bank.com. Purchasing a copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff operating, and it allows us to keep this event series going. So thank you so much for your support. And I realize that I'm saying it's Quave. Quave, like wave is how I should have been pronouncing it, and I am sorry for that. Robbie, if you would like to tell us a little bit about the Botanical Garden.
Sure. Thanks so much, Shane. I'm Robbie Hart from the William L. Brown Center at the Missouri Botanical Garden. The center is dedicated to the study of useful plants, understanding the relationships between humans, plants, and their environment, and the preservation of plants and also of traditional knowledge for the benefit of humanity. So, as you can imagine, with these goals, we're really pleased to be hosting Dr. Cassandra Quave, one of the real leaders in ethnobotany, or the study of plants and people together. Cassie's skill in building and leading the teams she works with, her use of historical sources, local knowledge, and cutting-edge technical methods, and also her ability to share this all with eloquence and humor that you'll see tonight, really make her a model in our field. And I'm really excited that we'll soon have her book to inspire us sort of within the garden and within the field of ethnobotany, and more importantly, to broaden awareness of ethnobotany for anyone who reads. Amy Stewart, of course, is also really beloved by botanists, by gardeners, and by plant lovers of all stripes. So I think it suffices to say for Amy that the year Drunken Botanist was published, I unwrapped not one, not two, but 3 copies of it under my tree. So thank you, Amy and Cassie, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
And I will plug as well that Amy's mystery series is a favorite thing that I gift to people for the holidays. So it's fantastic historical mysteries, top of the line. About tonight's book, The Plant Hunter, a scientist's quest for nature's next medicines. A leading medical ethnobotanist tells us the story of her quest to develop new ways to fight illness and disease through the healing power of plants in this uplifting and adventure-filled memoir. Plants are the basis for an array of life-saving and health-improving medicines we all now take for granted. Ever taken an aspirin? Thank a willow tree for that. What about life-saving medicines for malaria? Some of those are derived from cinchona and wormwood. In today's world of synthetic pharmaceuticals, scientists and laypeople alike have lost this connection to the natural world. But by ignoring the potential of medicinal plants, we are losing out on the opportunity to discover new life-saving medicines needed in the fight against the greatest medical challenge of the century, the rise of the post-antibiotic era. Antibiotic-resistant microbes plague us all. Each year, 700,000 people die due to these untreatable infections. By 2050, 10 million annual deaths are expected unless we act now. No one understands this better than Dr. Cassandra Quave, whose groundbreaking research as a leading medical ethnobotanist, someone who identifies and studies plants that may be able to treat antimicrobial resistance and other threatening illnesses, is helping to provide clues for the next generation of advanced medicines. In The Plant Hunter, Dr. Quave weaves together science, botany, and memoir to tell us the extraordinary story of her own journey. Traveling by canoe, ATV, mule, airboat, and on foot, she has conducted field research in the flooded forests of the remote Amazon, the murky swamps of southern Florida, the rolling hills of central Italy, isolated mountaintops in Albania and Kosovo, and volcanic isles arising out of the Mediterranean, all in search of natural compounds long known to traditional healers that could help save us all from the looming crisis of untreatable superbugs. And as a person born with multiple congenital defects of her skeletal system, she's done it all with just one leg. Filled with grit, tragedy, triumph, awe, and scientific discovery, her story illuminates how the path forward for medical discovery may be found in nature's oldest remedies. A couple of blurbs, including from our fantastic moderator for the evening, Amy Stewart, says, Cassandra Quave takes us on a fascinating and deeply personal journey to seek out modern medicines from the botanical world. As a scientist, she is scrappy and tenacious, and as a writer, she is eloquent and disarmingly honest. Fans of Hope Jaren's Lab Girl will devour this engrossing narrative about Quave's quest for the next cure. And Temple Grandin, the best-selling author of Thinking in Pictures, says, Cassandra Quave is a woman with incredible grit and courage. Now, about our speakers this evening. Cassandra Quave, PhD, is the herbarium curator and an associate professor of dermatology and human health at Emory University, where she leads anti-infective drug discovery research initiatives and teaches courses on medicinal plants, food, and health. She is also the co-founder and CSO of Phytotech LLC, a drug discovery company dedicated to developing solutions from botanicals for the treatment of recalcitrant antibiotic-resistant infections. Dr. Quave is a fellow of the Explorers Club, a former president of the Society for Economic Botany, and a recipient of the Emory Williams Teaching Award and Charles Heister Jr. Mentor Award. She is the co-creator and host of Foodie Pharmacology, a podcast dedicated to exploring the links between food and medicine. A leader in the field of medical botany, she has authored more than 100 scientific publications and has been featured in the New York Times Magazine and BBC Focus, as well as on PBS, NPR, and the National Geographic Channel. And tonight, she will be in conversation with Amy Stewart. Amy is the New York Times bestselling author of The Drunken Botanist, Wicked Plants, and several other popular nonfiction titles about the natural world. She's also written several novels in her beloved Cop Sisters series, which are based on the true story of one of America's first female deputy sheriffs and her two rambunctious sisters. Her books have sold over 1 million copies worldwide and have been translated into 18 languages. She lives in Portland with her husband, Scott Brown, a rare book dealer who can usually be found at his shop, Downtown Brown Books. And now, on behalf of Missouri Botanical Garden and Left Bank Books, if you all would please help me in warmly welcoming our fantastic guests for the evening, Dr. Cassandra Quave and Amy Stewart. Hello.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
All right. Well, I am looking forward to this conversation. I know that Robbie is as well. So we are going to turn this over to you, and we will be back at the end of the hour for the audience Q&A. So we will see you in a little bit.
Great. Thank you for the introduction. That was amazing. It's great to see you both.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. It's good to see you, Cassandra. It's been a while.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the last time we spoke was on the podcast. You talked about some of your amazing books on botany. That's an inspiration.
Well, yeah, and y'all should really check out her podcast if you haven't. I don't know how you find time for everything that you do, but on top of everything else, there's a podcast. And you know, my job as a writer is always to interview botanists. I'm always, people sometimes ask me about my background, and I'm like, you know, I have no expertise in anything. I don't know anything about anything. I go and interview people who know things. So I was so delighted with your book because it's that kind of storytelling that lets us not just understand the science, but actually lets us see how scientists do science. in a way that's just really interesting, and in a way that's just a personal story. And the reason I think that's so important is that I go around and I interview botanists, interview people doing what they're doing, and I get to see them in their workspaces. I get to go meet people in a greenhouse or a laboratory and see what they do. And there's all this kind of just cool sort of day-to-day stuff about that world that I just feel like, well, people don't really see this. Like, people don't just sort of see the day-to-day of how does any of this actually happen. And so that's what your book does. It's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun to kind of open the door into that world for people, both in the field and in the lab. And it was such an amazing opportunity to tell the story of what it is to become a scientist, because it's quite a journey. And for me, it really began in my childhood, just with my fascination with nature and science fairs, which I know a lot of parents, when they hear the word science fair, they kind of like, oh no. But I loved science fair as a kid, and I kind of just never stopped doing science fair. If you like really want to like drill down my job, I'm still doing science fair. So
okay, so but wait, before we move on, then I have to ask, like, so what would be like the dream science fair project if a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old came to you and said, "Come on, throw me a bone. Tell me what I should do." Like, what would it be?
Oh my gosh, there's just so many ideas. I'll tell you about like one that my kids did, because we got really into like weird fermentation at home. I mean, I'm a big fan of like lactic acid fermentation. It's like pickled vegetables.
Really?
Yeah. And so they did this experiment one year around the age of 10. I've got teenagers now, and then one still in elementary school. But where they tried to ferment different vegetables. And so we had these jars of just stuff like, bubbling out, and kind of just the house smelled like this crazy mix of kimchi and sauerkraut, and like the Brussels sprouts, fermented Brussels sprouts give an odor unlike any other. And it's not necessarily a pleasant odor. So our house was just kind of bubbling and brewing, but it was so much fun for them to watch that reaction and see the microbes growing, because they actually, it turns cloudy over time. So that's a fun one. Try and ferment different things and see which ones ferment the fastest.
Yeah, that's cool. That's fabulous. But anyway, getting back to your book. So I mean, this is a memoir that's it's kind of it's sort of your journey, your life story. But we get to follow along, and we get to look over your shoulder and see you do some incredible things. And I just want to say this as well, that talking about kids, that sometimes I get asked to go give a talk like in a high school or something, or maybe a college class. And I always ask them, is anyone interested in a career with plants? Are you interested in botany or horticulture? And kind of no one is. And I feel like I always want to shake them and go, do you understand? You could go live in Germany and work for a rose breeder. You could be in Latin America looking for plants that could be medicine. You could, like, the opportunities are extraordinary, and there's actually jobs, like, in the horticulture world, in the botanical world, there's like good jobs opening right now. So it's like such an amazing opportunity, and you were smart to follow your interests and to go there.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's so many really cool gigs, especially if you like to travel. I mean, there's so many interesting plants, and even really cool plants in your own backyards. Like, I think one of my goals of the book is also just to get people to stop and think and look in their yards, and kind of appreciate all of the creatures that live around us, and think a little bit about some of the benefits that some of those creatures give to our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so maybe you can talk to us a little bit about what led you. I mean, the book gets into all this, but folks won't have read it yet. So talk to us a little bit about what led you into ethnobotany specifically, and into plants with possible pharmaceutical benefits. Like, tell us a little bit about that part of the journey.
Yeah. So, I mean, as I mentioned, I was mad about science when I was a kid. I loved kind of observing nature. But I also was really immersed in medicine. So I was born with a number of different skeletal defects that led to the amputation of my leg at the age of 3. And I had basically an average of 1, sometimes 2 surgeries a year from the age of 3 to 18. So I was just constantly immersed in medicine. And of course, when you're immersed in medicine like that, the people that you're around, that are basically rebuilding your body become your heroes and who you aspire to become. And so from a very young age, I felt like I was destined to become a physician. And so when I went to college, I was, really focused on this hardcore pre-med track. But I discovered this fascination with anthropology and culture and started to look at medicine through different lenses. And, I'd never been exposed to these things before. And so I'd never even heard of anthropology before. I mean, this is kind of my, pre-internet era. Like I got my first email address when I started college. So, I only really had exposure to things that I had in my, stack of encyclopedias at home. And so I started getting more and more interested in different systems of medicine, what it meant to be disabled through the lens of different cultures. I mean, it was amazing to me in classes to learn that in some cultures, to be disabled is a sign of favor. It's a mark of favor by the gods. Whereas in other cultures, it's like, those people are kind of left to be discarded. And it got me thinking about, where does that put me in the world, right? Yeah. And I also started thinking more about different systems of medicine and how medicine can be more than just pharmacology and surgery, which until that point, that's what medicine was to me. It was cutting or medicating, and that's how I was treated. And it was in one of my classes in my junior year that I first was introduced to this term ethnobotany. And it was like this aha moment, because it's like, oh, wait, I can bring these love of nature and this love of medicine and culture together under one umbrella. And, that led to a number of events that eventually took me to the Amazon rainforest, where I studied with a healer. And, he just really opened my eyes to other ways of thinking about healing and set me on this path that I'm on today, where I'm really working to try and understand how these traditional medicines work. What are the underlying factors behind these remedies? What are the chemicals responsible for their activities? How do they work? Are they safe? Just all of those questions kind of opened up to me at that point.
Yeah.
I really knew nothing about botany, by the way, at the time. I didn't learn about botany until graduate school. So
it's kind of a funny thing that we have in common. My bachelor's degree was in anthropology.
Nice.
Totally by accident. I was supposed to be an English major so I could be a writer, but I got so interested in the anthropology, the like science for liberal arts classes that you take when you're an English major, that I ended up getting a degree in it. So yeah, I know ethnobotany is fascinating. This whole study of the connection between people and plants. And for me as a storyteller, that's what I'm interested in, right? Like I'm only ever kind of writing about plants. I'm mostly writing about people.
Yeah.
And I think what I've figured out over the years is that we connect to stories. Like we can remember a story and repeat it and tell it to someone else, tell it to maybe a lot of other people. 10 characteristics of a plant, we can't memorize those. And do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that, I mean, it's how we learn and it's how we understand the world. And so, and that's what you're doing with this book. I mean, you're doing the same thing. You're doing storytelling. And so I wonder how you approach this. I mean, you've done loads of academic writing, but you also have all this experience with kind of making stories more accessible. I mean, the podcast is just one example of that. But when you sat down and thought about, I'm going to write a memoir, suddenly you're telling a story where you are the protagonist, or I should say a version of you. Like I've written memoir as well, and I've put myself in my own books, and it's a version of me. It's not all of me. So how did you think about that? Like when you sat down to tackle this?
I think a lot of it came out of my experience in the classroom, because I've designed and teach classes at Emory. One's on food and health. The other is on botanical medicine and health. And, these can become really complicated subjects. And I've learned over the years, I've been teaching there for around 10 years now, that when I use the tool of storytelling, the students grab onto that, and they remember that. And I see it in their, in their essays and in their exam scores. It's like, the ones where I really try and give them something to latch onto with a story that kind of brings these little minutiae around the chemicals in the plants and which species are used and what country they come from and which cultures use them. When that's wrapped into a story or a kind of experience, and especially when I can offer them a piece of that experience through tasting or smelling or doing something with the actual plants themselves, they really latch onto that. So I try to kind of think about it that way when I was writing this. And it's funny, people keep asking me like, how did you this? And it's almost like PTSD. I don't even know how did it just kind of, I wrote and wrote and wrote, and then I revised a lot. The book is long. I overshot my word limit by a lot more, and I had to really cut it back. And the hardest part of writing was really picking the key stories to focus on, which was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. But I'm really happy with how it came out, because it does tell a story. But you're right, it is just it's a piece of my life. And now, I mean, there's a difference, I guess, between autobiography and memoir. This is a sliver of things that have happened so far. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You have to decide what to leave in and what to leave out, and it's tough to do, and figuring out, what does the reader need in order to sort of guide them through the story. I think, I want to say maybe it was E.B. White who said he was talking about personal essays, but it's kind of true it's personal essays and memoir, that the suspense, the thing that keeps the reader turning the page, is the question of how honest is this narrator really going to get with us? Like, how far are they willing to go in terms of what they reveal and how honest they are? And this is a story that obviously required a lot of honesty and a lot of digging deep and telling a personal story that's unbelievably tough. I mean, it was astonishing to read. So that must have, and you have to write about it in a way so that it can feel, I don't want to say fresh, but it's your story and it's familiar to you, but you've got to put it before people who are going to be hearing it for the first time. And that means thinking about it in a particular way, I guess.
Yeah. I think, I've been waiting so long for this book to come out, but I'm also extremely terrified it's come out now, because I'm like, oh my God, people are gonna read my story now.
They're gonna know everything.
I mean, I think it's just part of the way that I approach life, though. I'm very much a straight shooter. I kind of tell it like it is. That's how I lead my team. I don't necessarily sugarcoat things. And that probably comes across in the book, because I don't shy away from some of the hard parts. But I'm hopeful that the joy, I mean, the real joy that I've felt in my career and in my journeys comes through too, because I think that's really what's motivated me, to continue in this journey. And it's been such an amazing journey. And, it's such a privilege to be able to be in this line of work where I get to meet such interesting people. And, I'm constantly learning from what I read, but from people I encounter, from the plants, from healers, from just all sorts of individuals. And so that's really what keeps me going. And I hope that came across too.
Right. Well, let's talk about the plants a little bit. So one thing that struck me as I was reading is that I feel like there's this way that we understand plants as medicine that's kind of like, I drink a cup of chamomile tea at night and it helps me sleep. Or I've heard that St. John's wort could treat my depression, so I'm going to go down to the little herb store and get some capsules. And so there's that sort of which I guess I would call herbal medicine. That is something that we're quite familiar with. And then there's this way of working with plants and really looking at pharmaceutical applications in a way that feels almost like a different universe. Can you sort of talk about that a little bit, and maybe an example from the book? Or I don't
Yeah,
know.
I mean, I think we saw a real change when in the use of plants as medicines, really beginning in the 1800s, when we started to isolate compounds from plants. I
Mhm.
mean, some of the most important ones could include, the opiates like, codeine and morphine, which of course now opioids are causing huge problems because of their abuse. But at the same time, that plant has been a game changer in helping to manage pain, serious pain at end of life, or also, after surgeries. Um, but so you had the kind of the traditional means of using that plant as a whole preparation, kind of like an extract of the latex. And then, in post 1800s, we started isolating those compounds and using those as individual kind of
Mhm.
pharmaceuticals. So that story replays over and over again. A lot of our major drugs for everything from, again, from pain to heart disease to cancer, to a number of different dermatologic conditions, relies on some of these compounds that were originally discovered in plants but are now produced in a factory setting. So we kind of dissociate these ideas. A lot of these drugs that we take for granted in the pharmacy shelves, we don't think of that as, oh, that's a plant medicine.
Right.
When you go to the dietary supplement aisle, you think, oh, that's a plant medicine, but you don't,
Yeah.
it's actually very much a plant medicine. And there are so many more plants out there to study. I think that's probably the biggest revelation of, that I've come to in my own work, is we've only barely skimmed the surface of some of the potential of these medicinal plants, really from a perspective of rigorous examination in the scientific lab. We've only looked at a few hundred at best when it comes to like really studying them. And there are 33,000 plus species that people are using as medicine around the world.
Mhm.
Also, this idea in the US, herbal medicine is considered like something that's complementary to our, Western medicine paradigm. But the reality is, billions of people across the globe use plants in their whole form that they collect in the wild, or they, store at home, or they transform into different types of ointments and things like that they use as their first line of medicine.
Mhm.
So I think this area of research is important, not just for fueling drug discovery pipelines, also before we lose access to many of these plants with the biodiversity crisis, but also evaluate their safety and efficacy for the people that use them as whole plants.
Mhm. Right. And is there anything that you're maybe that's coming up for you that just in terms of, can you give us an example of a plant or a species, or just something that's really interesting that maybe you're working on now or looking forward to working on soon?
Yeah, there's a couple of plants. It's I've had a lot of fun working with. I'll start with the Brazilian pepper tree, because
Yeah.
it's a plant that everyone hates in Florida, but I love it. It's a noxious weed, but the tradition of its use goes back to pre-1600s. We found records going back to the 1600s in Latin of its use in South America to treat wounds and ulcers. And my team has identified compounds from the pepper tree that stop the kind of toxic actions of MRSA in its tracks. And so there's some really exciting kind of applications that we're exploring to treat really aggressive staph infections with compounds we've isolated from that plant. Another one I really love is that of the American beautyberry. I don't know if that one, I don't know if it grows on the West Coast, how well it does. It grows in the wild in the Southeast, and it's an ornamental plant. This is beautiful, has these purple fruits all along its stalks. And, it was used by Native American peoples of the Southeast US as a kind of mosquito repellent, and others have isolated compounds that act as insect repellents. But we also noted that there were uses for different types of skin afflictions. And we found another compound in the leaves that basically restore the activity of certain antibiotics to some of these drug-resistant infections. So we're finding cool ways that plants are able to kind of help us in the fight against infection. And I think there's a lot of potential there. I mean, it's going to require a paradigm shift, though, because currently our kind of antibiotic therapy the idea is basically to kill or slow down the growth of bacteria. But these plants work in different ways. And I think that is a testament to how traditional medicine works.
Right.
Traditional medicine is about not necessarily killing a certain, pathogenic agent. It's about restoring the health of the patient. And I think that's what we can do with some of these compounds.
Yeah, well, and what you bring up about plants that can treat staph infections and wound infection. I mean, this is personal to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So when my leg was amputated, I got this horrific staph infection at the age of 3 that almost killed me. And, I blame staph. It's like my nemesis today because, because of that infection, I survived it, thankfully. But because of that infection, my stump, so my residual limb, had to be amputated much shorter. And whereas most amputees today have a nice thick padding of kind of fat tissues and skin under their bone, I'm just like bone right on bare scar tissue.
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of high impact activities like jogging and running just really aren't a possibility for me. So I'm kind of, I'm a walker. I can't really, run on those really bouncy, Olympic legs. I'm not an athlete in that way, but I do get up and get outdoors. But that infection had long lasting consequences for me throughout the rest of my life because of the damage it did to my tissues.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is an issue that I think, people don't realize and don't appreciate until it happens to them or it happens to a loved one. A wound that won't heal is a road that nobody wants to go down. And so coming up with any new treatment options, that is incredible. It's incredible work that you do.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's rewarding because it's not, I mean, I'm very much eager to find new solutions, but it's also rewarding to be able to talk to the healers that we work with and the communities that we work with and explain how their medicines are working in the lab. I think that's like a really exciting aspect of our work, is returning that knowledge and to the communities.
That's really cool. Right. Yeah. And I think that's a really important way to think about it. It's not like we're finding these resources and saying, thank you very much, we'll take this.
Yeah, exactly.
Off we go. But actually continuing to work together and to build that knowledge.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly.
Right. Is there a part, I mean, you're so well traveled and I don't know, we've all been sort of shut down for a while. So anytime I'm thinking about people's travels around the world, it's like all I want to talk about. But is there some place you haven't been? Do you have some goals in terms of, I would love to be able to get here to do some research maybe someday, or anything on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking lately about kind of bigger goals. Now I've kind of reached this midpoint in my career, and I've been like, what if money wasn't an issue? If I had the grant funding, if I had the support, what would I do? And the more I've thought about this, the more I really, I'm just going to talk about this idea, and maybe some patron is listening and say, you know what, we're going to fund this. So I'm going to say,
listen up, folks.
It's like, I would love to be able to build a global network across the 36 global biodiversity hotspots for terrestrial biodiversity. These are places in the world that have high levels of endemic species. So these are plants that really only grow in that part of the world. But these are also areas where you have a high percentage of the landscape being under threat due to development or human expansion. So these are not only very rich in species diversity, but they're also threatened. And so there's an urgency to study these sites. What we found in our research, we just published a big paper that looked at everything that's been published in terms of plant-derived antibiotics since 2012. And we came up with over 400 compounds that have been isolated from plants that have some potential promise. But what was amazing is, through this massive literature review, I mean, we looked at like 4,000 papers. That was our COVID project. My team was like working on it. It was like crazy.
This is our work from home project.
Yeah. But what really became abundantly clear is that there's a major disadvantage across the globe right now, because in some of the places where you have the richest areas of biodiversity, and you have incredibly talented scientists there, by the way, as well, in those countries, those scientists also are operating under extremely restricted research infrastructures. So they don't have the buildings, they don't have the equipment, or always the access to training that's needed to really tap into the diversity of their own countries, plants, and to really explore the chemical potential of those. And so my big dream would be to build a large network that helps put research infrastructures in place in those countries, working in strict collaboration with local scientists to kind of really push forward the science of botanicals and really start to dig in a serious way into these 33,000 species that are not being studied. Because, this is relevant not just for infectious disease, but there are many other, areas where we need new therapies to improve human health across the globe. That's my dream of what I like to do. So it would be traveling to those 36 biodiversity hotspots, basically, to kind of get that going. But for fun, I'm going in a couple of weeks to the UK. I'm going to Wales for the first time. To do some tour stuff around England, and then we're going to Snowdonia, which is this amazingly beautiful kind of national park in Wales with mountains and lakes. And we're going to go swimming in the wild. And that's going to be my first trip since COVID. I'm very excited about it.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm all behind your research dreams. I feel like, the Gates Foundation or somebody like that needs to open up their checkbook and make it happen. I'm totally on board. I approve.
Great.
Well, don't you think? I think if we've learned anything in the last year and a half, it's how quickly we can move when we put the resources behind it.
Absolutely.
The little that I understand about the development of the COVID vaccine is that this was an idea. This has been in the works for a long time. It's been kind of cooking along, and there was sort of this idea for a while of like, we could come up with a pan-corona vaccine. Common cold's no big deal, but what if we ever got like a really bad one? Be handy to have, and everyone's kind of like, and then now here we go. So it sort of feels like working on all this stuff in advance of a giant crisis when we really need it would be a super good idea.
It would be a super good idea. And this is just emblematic of the field. We're very reactive with how we prioritize funding for different areas of scientific research rather than being proactive. Especially when it comes to infectious disease. This is kind of the story. Ebola's here, was Ebola, and then and then the money goes away. Now it's coronavirus, and then will that go away? And antibiotic resistance is kind of the silent pandemic right now. It's still happening. We know numbers are still rising, but there's just a slew of problems there. And there's also, challenges with funding for basic ethnobotanical field research. It's like I have challenges in getting funding, to run my field expeditions. I kind of have to wrap them into my larger kind of biomedical enterprise to be able to do those. And, we need more scientists that have this kind of interdisciplinary training that can work in these, hotspots of diversity, and also work in collaboration with different indigenous peoples to ensure that their voices are being heard, in this rapidly changing world.
Right. Yeah. No, I remember when I was working on Wicked Plants, which is a book about dangerous, deadly, poisonous plants. I sort of thought at the beginning, like, well, I'm going to send off to like National Geographic, and they're going to have like a big poster with like all the toxic plants in the whole world and what the mechanism is and what the sort of lethal dose would be. And it's all going to be like one giant chart, and I can just get that. And I was astonished to find out that how patchy our knowledge is. Like, and sometimes I'll be in front of an audience and they'll ask questions and I'll be like, do you know, actually no one knows that. Like we need this kind of peer research, this kind of just, the notion of just in a very unfettered way, let's just go out and let's ask these questions and let's just find out.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we need that. We need, one of the things I love about your work too, Amy, is you're such a great communicator. Just talking about Nat Geo, you made me think of like your museum exhibits and how you get that message out through your touring museum exhibits. I just love that. I think, one of the challenges in really fostering more support for scientific research is we need to encourage and expose people to science in more accessible ways. I think that can help a lot.
Right. Well, and also, and I should say that North Carolina Arboretum built that Wicked Plants exhibit. I had very surprisingly little to do with it, but they did an amazing job. But the thing though about your book too is that something that kind of frustrates me sometimes about science museums is they're very oriented towards children, which is lovely, but it's adults who do science. Like scientists are grown-ups. And so a science museum should be interesting to grown-ups. Like grown-ups should be able to engage in science in an interesting way. And so, your book is a book that's written for grown-ups. And I just really appreciate that. Like we are the ones who sort of want to geek out on all this stuff with you, which is not to diminish getting children engaged in science at all, but like both should exist. And so, a book like this is a great way to do that.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a rising curiosity around herbs and herbal medicine in general. I mean, especially during COVID. I think one of the things that the pandemic really laid bare was, how much people wanted to take control of their own health. And, herbal supplement sales went through the roof. I mean, higher than ever before. And, the scary thing is that, a lot of this wasn't really informed on science because the science hadn't been done yet. We need to fill those gaps. We need to understand, even for those herbs that are being sold at record numbers, we don't really understand what's in those herbs, chemically speaking. What are all of their pharmacological properties? Are they safe to take with our other medicines? Because not all herbs are. So there's a lot of questions to fill. And I think there is a rising interest in plants. And I hope, I guess one of my other hopes of this is that we just get more people out there. It's my great call. Come to become ethnobotanists. Come and learn about plants and nature and people and chemistry and medicine and make your stamp on the world.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we're going to start taking questions in just a few minutes, but is there anything else that you really wanted people to take away from this book that maybe we haven't talked about yet?
I guess some of the major takeaways are just, the fact that there is such untapped potential in nature, right?
Yeah.
It's I was so excited to see everything that's happening with space exploration. I mean, I grew up in Florida. I grew up during like the space shuttle launches, and we'd go outside and look at the sky and see these go up, and it was just amazing. And but the reality is there's so much to explore in our own world that we just need to look and we need to observe and pay attention. So yes, reach for the stars, but maybe start by looking at the grass and the herbs growing around you, or the mushrooms and all these dynamics that these different organisms have, and the way that they communicate together. I mean, I think it's really an exciting period in the history of science because we're finally learning how to read the language of nature through these chemical signals, and that's really cool.
Yeah, that's great. Well, before Shane comes back and helps us out with questions, I guess I should ask the inevitable question: what are you working on next?
I don't know.
Another book is there?
Yeah. Well, I'm like super behind on another book I'm trying to finish. It's a textbook in medical botany, so I kind of need to knock that one out before I launch into my next popular science book. But I've been thinking a lot about it, and I love the audience feedback. I mean, one of the things I've been contemplating is something on pain, and just all the different ways that traditional systems of medicine approach issues of pain. And as someone that deals with chronic pain all the time, I was kind of selfishly thinking maybe I could take my advance and travel around the world and try different ways of pain management and then write about it. It's kind of
please write this book. Totally.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, that's what I'm leaning towards. The other one I was thinking about was skin, and just getting into like practices around how we clean and care for our skin and the skin microbiome. And I haven't quite found the right angle, but I was definitely thinking of a lot of spa visits.
Okay. Well, I'm coming with you.
Yeah, we should do that.
We should do that one together.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Totally.
So there's just some things I've been juggling in my head.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, I hope you have the time and space to explore all of that.
Thank you.
Well, here's Shane and Robbie.
All right.
And Amy, I believe I want to ask you what you're working on, because I am always interested in when the next Cop Sisters is coming. But you have a project that you're working on that's really exciting, and some people watching might be able to help.
Yeah, I do. So I am not writing another Cop Sisters novel right now, which is not to say that I might not come back to them. I've written 7 books about their true story, And if you get all the way to the end, you'll find out that I've left them in a very good place. That's also true. It's also real. So I could pick it up and keep going with their true story. But anyway, what I'm doing right now, and this is just new as of like a couple of weeks ago, that I just made the deal with the publisher, is that I'm going to write a book about tree collectors.
Ooh.
Yes. So many years ago, I met a guy who told me that he was a tree collector. And I was like, trees are a weird thing to collect because they're really big and they're hard to move. So how does this work? And anyway, I've met a few other tree collectors over the years. And during the shutdown, I had a lot of free time and a lot of time to think. And I pulled this idea out of the archives and decided to do it. So I'm in the throes of interviewing tree collectors all over the world. It's going to be a very global book. So yeah, if anybody out there knows a person who collects trees, as much as I love institutions like Missouri Botanical Garden, it's not so much a book about big institutional collections, but more, I mean, there will be some of that, but more about individual people. So please send your tree collectors my way. You can very easily find me online and email me through my website. I am quite eager to talk to anyone who collects trees in any form or fashion.
That's so cool.
That is really cool. Yeah. I want to encourage the audience. I know you're watching. I'm certain that you have questions. So be sure to type those up in the chat function on Facebook or YouTube. Just type those up and we will get to those. Robbie, do you want to start us off with a question?
Sure. A real softball. But Cassie, no, I was thinking about this, so we currently have this system of drug discovery, right, where we rely on private companies to invest enormous amounts of money and time. And we really hope they don't lose interest or go broke in the meantime. And then maybe we reward them with enormous profits if they succeed. So I think that, you and others have experienced that this represents a real hurdle to drug discovery and to the ultimate aims of human well-being. So, so COVID Moonshot and some other people have called for other models like open discovery and public funding. Do you think these are possible, or are there other ways that we can do this better?
Yeah, there has to be better ways. I mean, I'm not an economist, so I'll put that out there right now. I can tell you a little bit about some of the things that I've read about and a little bit from personal experience. So there's the discovery end, and then there's the development and post-market kind of monitoring end. And there's a big gap, a big valley between discovery, which there's a lot of discovery that actually can happen in academic institutions that gets licensed out to industry. But before it can get licensed out, there's what we call the valley of death, where good drugs go to die. And this is because this is all the preclinical testing that you need to do before you can get it packaged up and ready for submissions to the FDA to run a clinical trial. So there's a huge chasm there that most academic scientists can't get through. And then when it comes to companies, I mean, it's kind of crazy. Like with some of these, we've had a number of companies come out with antibiotics in the past decade, and some of them have pretty immediately folded just because of the sheer expense of doing the post-market, post-release monitoring. So they get FDA approved and they just go bankrupt. So there's a serious problem. There are people, again, much better informed than I, that are looking at systems like push-pull, this idea of kind of having government subscription plans, basically kind of like you have your Netflix plan, but governments would subscribe to this to kind of help fuel through these difficult steps. But I'm not sure what's going to work. I think the whole kind of the capitalist mindset around drugs, rather than, as you said, drugs for the common good of humanity, I think that's the bigger issue at hand, right? It is an incredibly expensive endeavor. I mean, to the tune of hundreds of millions to $1 billion to bring a new drug to market. So it's pretty intense. Yeah, challenge.
All right, so Robbie asked the softball question, apparently. I'm going to ask the hardball question. So Robbie and I are both in St. Louis. I assume that there are several members of the audience as well that might be local. So I'm wondering for you, Cassandra, what plants might we be able to find in our environment that might be most beneficial to us, that if used properly can be helpful? And for you, Amy, what are the ones that we should avoid?
That's great. Well, I mean, I think one of the ones that you find all over the place is like Plantago. It's this little, ground cover plant, also known as plantain. You can kind of chew that up and stick it on insect bite, insect stings and stop, the sting from that. That's an easy one to find. But I'm actually, I think for people that aren't so well acquainted with like identifying plants in the wild, I really encourage people to try gardening, even if it's on your apartment balcony. There's so many cool mints and herbs that you can grow and make amazing teas with. So a couple of my favorite herbal teas that I grow in my garden are Tulsi, which is like an Ayurvedic medicine plant, but it's also known as holy basil. So it's a kind of basil, but it doesn't taste like basil. It just has this amazing flavor, and it's kind of just a resilience booster. And I also really like catnip. Most people think of cats, which I did as well until I was working in the Balkans, and I learned that mothers use catnip tea to calm like children that have nightmares and when they're anxious. And I get anxious as a scientist sometimes. So I like to mix like my catnip tea with some leaves of my Tulsi and make this nice tea together, and sometimes throw in some lemon balm. So start with some plants that are easy to grow, and they're also like really easy to grow. It's hard to kill these, and I know because I'm really good at killing plants. It's all due to my husband. Our garden is still alive out back, so these I've not managed to kill, so they're foolproof.
Nice. Well, it's a good reminder that, and this is something I talk about a lot, both with Wicked Plants and somewhat with Drunken Botanist also, is that, plants are these living green chemical factories. And they make all these chemicals for their own reasons that have nothing to do with us. They're not aware of us. They're not interested in us. So, they're making them for various reasons, to attract pollinators or to fight off predators or to shrug off a disease. And some of those chemicals happen to have an effect on us as well. And it can be good or bad. But, the main thing to remember is that in general, broadly speaking, plants really don't want to get eaten. If you're a plant and you wake up in the morning, what's your first priority? Try not to get eaten today. And, you're rooted in the ground, so you can't run and hide, and you don't have opposable thumbs. You can't throw things at people to keep them away. So the only thing you can really do is inflict pain and suffering on anyone who tries to eat you. So in that sense, I have become, and it sounds, Cassandra, like you're sort of in the same camp, although you're much more knowledgeable than me. But like if I'm out, say, on a hike with someone and they pull a leaf or a berry off a shrub and go, "Here, try this," I'm always like, I'm good. I had a sandwich. I'm fine. Right? That's what trail mix is for. I have a kind bar in my backpack. I'm going to be all right here. So, when I sold my house in California and moved up here to Portland, I had at one time had a poison garden at my house, and the people who bought the house knew about this. They had Googled me and figured this out and they wanted me to sign a certificate saying that there were no poisonous plants on the property in order for them to buy the house. And I was just like, you can't get that from any homeowner. Like, we have hemlock. It's a weed on the West Coast. Like, I can't promise that hemlock isn't going to sprout up the day we close escrow, but that's true any house in this neighborhood. So, yeah, don't go looking for trouble.
That's great.
Pauline says, "Hi. Is there a reliable source for information on medicinal or harmful compounds in common plants, if one were to take your suggestion of exploring plants around one's local area?"
Yeah, I mean, I always recommend that people start with, local guides. So there are lots of amazing books you can find that have kind of plants of that region where you live. You can often find them at state parks or at national parks, in the gift shop. Great sources to find the right books for that. And, another resource is also to look to kind of master gardener clubs and kind of local plant clubs where you can learn with other people that are experienced about which plants are safe for you to forage from and which are not. Just like the rules for mushrooms, you don't want to just randomly go and eat some, random mushroom. You don't want to do the
same how it goes
with plants either. So it's just, educating yourself. There are lots of resources out there, be it through books, but I really encourage, if you can, get involved in some of these like local clubs or courses that you can take also through botanical gardens.
Yeah, and university extension offices. I hear a lot from bartenders who are looking, or distillers who are looking to work with cool plants to make drinks. And they're always astonished when I tell them that every state in the nation has a university devoted to agriculture and to helping farmers figure out what food to grow and what to do with the plants that grow. And it's called the Extension Office. And then when they go and look at it, they're like, what? So and it's like, and it's free. They want to help you. It's a public service. It's incredible. So that exists in every state. And generally, I find that they often have lists of toxic plants as well as edibles and information on foraging. I mean, as do the botanical gardens, but that can vary by community and what the botanical garden's up to.
I know that we have books on our shelves that are helpful for finding edible local plants, and I guarantee that the Botanical Garden gift shop also has books available.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Speaking of edibles, so Cassie, you have the Foodie Pharmacology podcast, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the overlap between things that are edible and medicinal. Is it 100%? Is there any difference between edible plants and medicinal plants, or between foods and medicines?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's this weird continuum, which is why we call it the food medicine continuum, because sometimes a food can just be a food and sometimes it can be a medicine. A simple example I like to give people is, the banana. So anyone that has young children knows that, like, if you feed them bananas, it's going to constipate them. Like, you're obsessed with like kids poop when they're little, right? So it's like, okay, if they've got diarrhea, give them a little banana, it'll solve the problem, right? So in that context, if you're giving them the banana as a medicine to kind of treat a problem, then it would be a medicine. Or you might just eat a banana because you like to eat bananas, and it's a food. And so there are lots of examples like that in many different cultures, where sometimes they can play that role of, food or medicine, or sometimes they're both. I've done a lot of work in southern Italy looking at wild edible greens, really bitter kind of greens like chicory. I think people in the audience may have tasted chicory. If you've ever tasted like dandelion leaves, those are also really bitter. So like those types of that flavors are really preferred, and they're preferred because of this idea that bitterness is equated with health value. And in fact, they do have a ton of polyphenols. They're amazing sources of antioxidants. These are health benefiting herbs. But those kind of fall into the line of medicinal food, where they're eaten specifically because of this kind of general health benefiting property. Yeah. And we kind of explore that in the podcast. I have all kinds of amazing guests, including Amy's been on the show. We had one of the recent Nobel laureates was on the show last year that studied capsaicin and pain receptors.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, Dr. Julius. He's super nice guy too. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, I know a Nobel laureate. He's actually really nice. It's like, and yeah, lots of different angles. We've also interviewed ethnobotanists, including Robbie, who gave this amazing account of his work in the Himalayas. And I'll never forget yak butter tea and your description of that. So anybody out there, you should definitely tune into these episodes. But we're just trying to give different perspectives on what is food, what is medicine, and what types of foods are people eating around the world, and what types of effects are those having on our body. Yeah.
Well, I think we are almost out of time. That hour went by incredibly quickly, and I learned so much. I want to thank both of you so much for doing this event for Left Pink Books and for the Missouri Botanical Garden. I just dropped a link into the chat as well that has how to pre-order The Plant Hunter, which comes out on Tuesday officially. Yay. So we will have copies on our shelves on Tuesday. And we also almost always have Drunken Botanist on our shelves, Wicked Plants, because I staff pick all of the Cop Sisters. Those are almost always there as well. So big plug for Amy Stewart's writing as well. And yes. I wish you both just the best of luck in your further endeavors. I cannot wait for the next books to come out from you.
Thank you so much, guys. This has been so much fun. Thank you to the audience too for hanging out with us on a Friday night. You know, it's a lot of fun.
Well, thanks everybody for being here. And for Left Bank Books, you know, I just want to tell you all, I used to own a bookstore, and nothing matters more to bookstores than that you buy books at the bookstore. So please, if you're not in the area, maybe think about, if you enjoyed tonight, order something from them. If it's not one of our books, they have everything. And Missouri Botanical Garden, you know, easily the best botanical garden in this country and such a treasure. So if anyone's never been there, then it's time. And I can't wait until I can travel again and get back to see you guys. It's been too long.
You're both so welcome. Anyone locally and anywhere else as well.
All right. Well, have a great rest of your evening, and hopefully we will see you all again really soon.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.